My phone rang sharply at exactly 7:12 a.m. My daughter's voice came through the receiver, icy and devoid of any emotion. "Dad, Grandpa passed away last night." I simply put the phone on speaker, because her grandfather was sitting right next to me at the kitchen table, holding a hot cup of coffee, and he was perfectly alive and well. "Hello, everyone. Thank you for stopping by. Before we get into exactly what happened after my father spoke into that phone, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Let's begin." It was 7:12 a.m. on a Wednesday. It was a perfectly peaceful morning, exactly like thousands of others we had shared. That is, until my cell phone began to vibrate violently against the wooden tabletop. The screen flashed the name Sarah, my one and only daughter. Ever since her mother passed away 3 long years ago, the number of times she had called me this early in the morning could be counted on one hand, and every single time it was accompanied by some sort of massive financial crisis. But this time, my gut instinct screamed at me that something far, far worse was coming. "Sarah?" I picked up the phone, my voice still heavy with sleep. "Dad, Grandpa passed away last night." The sentence slipped from her lips without a single tremor, without even the faintest trace of sorrow. It was cold, slick, and completely detached, delivered with the mechanical precision of a pre-recorded weather broadcast. My eyes automatically darted across the table to where the man who had just been declared dead was calmly flipping to the 3rd page of the sports section. "What?" I asked, desperately trying to fake the shock I was supposed to be feeling. "The hospital just called me," Sarah continued, the pace of her voice picking up, carrying an unmistakable undertone of barely concealed triumph. "The funeral is going to be on Friday. You are getting absolutely nothing." From the other end of the line, I heard the arrogant, bitter laugh of Brandon, my son-in-law. A cynical, deeply malicious sneer. "You have been completely eliminated from the game." I wasn't angry. Instead, a bone-chilling wave of ice ran straight down my spine. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear, tapped the speakerphone icon, and placed it right back in the center of the table. My father slowly lowered his newspaper. He glanced at the phone, and then he looked at me. He leaned forward, directly toward the phone's microphone, and uttered exactly one word. "Sarah." An absolute deafening silence instantly fell over the line. It was a thick, heavy, and utterly suffocating silence. I could distinctly hear the sharp, frantic intake of breath on the other end. A sudden gasp of pure, unadulterated panic. "What?" Sarah's voice shattered into a million pieces. "Where are you?" "I am right here," my father replied, his voice deep, steady, and crystal clear. "I am sitting at your father's kitchen table, drinking my morning coffee, and I am perfectly alive and well." "Now, what the hell are you playing at, Sarah?" Another dead, terrifying silence followed. Then came the frantic sound of muffled cursing, rushed footsteps, and something clattering loudly onto a hardwood floor. Brandon was violently swearing in a blind panic. "Grandpa, I don't understand," Sarah stammered, desperately trying to glue her shattered mask back together. "And you didn't make it." "I haven't set foot inside Denver General Hospital in over 5 years," my father replied coldly. "Therefore, whoever called you was undeniably lying. Instead, your very first instinct was to immediately call my son to gleefully inform him that he had been cut out of my will. I was just relaying the information I was given." I was in a state of shock. "Who gave you that information?" My father cut her off sharply, his authoritative voice pressing down on her. "Who exactly informed you that I was dead, Sarah?" The only sound from the other end was a ragged, panicked breathing. And then, abruptly, a long dial tone echoed through the kitchen. She had hung up. I stared blankly at the darkened screen of my phone. My heart was pounding furiously against my ribs. My own daughter had just orchestrated a sickening, macabre theatrical performance before my coffee had even gone cold. My father leisurely took another sip of his coffee, then set the cup down. "She knew, Richard. She knew damn well I wasn't dead. But why on earth would she do that?" I asked, my voice completely dry. I felt like I was trapped in a surreal, suffocating nightmare. Or was this an attempt to establish some sort of alibi? My father nodded slowly, a terrifying, razor-sharp glint in his eyes. If something tragic were to actually happen to me over the next few days, she could easily point back to this exact phone call. It is an incredibly ruthless, Highly calculated preemptive strike. My father reached into the pocket of his thick cardigan and pulled out a small black device. A digital voice recorder. He had turned it on at some point without me even noticing. "We are going to record absolutely everything," he stated firmly. "Every single phone call, every threat, every fabricated lie. Because this war is only just beginning, Richard." He paused for a heartbeat, his eyes dropping, carrying a heavy, indescribable sorrow. "Margaret warned me about this. Your mother saw this coming from a mile away." The mere mention of Margaret's name made my chest violently constrict. My beloved wife. She had passed away 3 years ago, after a long, grueling battle with a vicious cancer. "What did she say?" I asked, my voice choking up. My father looked out the window, watching the early morning sunlight begin to dance across the pavement. 3 years ago, during her final months, Margaret confided in me that Sarah had started asking some very strange, deeply unsettling questions. About exactly how the real estate properties would be appraised and liquidated if someone were to pass away. A violent shudder ran through my entire body. "Why didn't you tell me this back then?" "Because at that time, you were drowning in the unbearable agony of losing the love of your life. You never would have believed that your own flesh and blood daughter was coldly calculating the division of assets right next to her mother's deathbed. She warned me that Sarah would never stop until she had seized absolute control over everything." I buried my face in my trembling hands. How could the little girl I had once held in my arms, taught to ride a bicycle, the child who used to cry hysterically over a scraped knee, mutate into such a ruthless, cold-blooded monster? They were a perfectly matched pair of absolute greed. Suddenly, the screen of my father's cell phone lit up. An email push notification popped up on the status bar. 6:47 a.m. Urgent security alert from First Colorado Bank. Unauthorized access attempt detected. My father's face visibly paled. He hastily opened the email, his eyes scanning rapidly across the screen. Then he looked up at me, his expression turning deadly serious. "It's not just one bank, Richard," he said quietly. "I have 3 separate fraud alerts. They all came in between 6:47 and 7 this morning." We locked eyes as the horrifying truth finally became perfectly, sickeningly clear. Sarah didn't just call to test my reaction. She and her parasitic husband had actually made their move. "It's time to call Patricia," my father declared decisively. Patricia Anderson was my father's personal attorney, a woman with a spine of absolute steel who specialized in high-stakes estate litigation and elder law. If Sarah and Brandon were executing a massive, coordinated attack, we desperately needed someone who knew how to fight a ruthless, scorched earth war. But before I could even dial Patricia's number, my phone vibrated again. This time it was a voicemail notification from Sarah. I put it on speaker. Her voice had now miraculously regained its fabricated composure. It was sickly sweet and smooth as a water snake. "Dad, I am so incredibly sorry for losing my composure earlier. It turns out we actually received a horrific scam call from someone fraudulently claiming to be the hospital. Please, don't say a word to Grandpa about this." Memory slipping, my father repeated the phrase, a bitter, contemptuous smirk forming on his lips. Their sheer, unadulterated audacity had far surpassed the absolute limits of human imagination. They had literally just been caught red-handed lying about his tragic death, and less than 15 minutes later, they shamelessly flipped the script, using their own fabricated lie as the perfect excuse to forcefully seize control of his entire estate. My father stood up abruptly and grabbed his coat. "Let's go. I guarantee you those banking alerts from this morning are just the tip of the iceberg." During the tense, silent drive to the attorney's office, my mind helplessly drifted back through the years, desperately searching for some logical explanation for my daughter's horrifying moral decay. This drastic transformation didn't just happen overnight. It started as a tiny, barely noticeable hairline fracture, innocuous complaints, minor slights, that gradually widened into a massive, insurmountable chasm. 3 years ago, immediately following Margaret's funeral, Sarah had insisted on staying at my house to help me clean up and organize. I had foolishly believed it was a profound act of familial comfort. But then, I caught her frantically digging through her mother's private desk drawers. When I confronted her, she violently slammed the drawers shut, stammering out a pathetic excuse about looking for some old family photographs. Then came the endless loans. Dad, Brandon desperately needs a small injection of seed capital to launch his software project. It's only $50,000. We will pay you back in full with proper interest in exactly 6 months. I had foolishly given them the money. That $50,000 vanished into thin air. If Mom were still alive, she would never ever treat me like this. That was exactly how she operated. She constantly weaponized Margaret's tragic death to violently manipulate my emotions, ruthlessly exploiting the deep vulnerability of a grieving, widowed old man. But their ultimate target was never actually my retirement fund. I was just a retired high school teacher. The person who held the true, staggering wealth in this family was my father, William Stone. My father was a completely self-made real estate tycoon. He lived on a sprawling, magnificent 40-acre ranch nestled in the mountains of Evergreen, a breathtaking property easily valued at no less than $2 million. He lived an incredibly private, unassuming life, never once flaunting his immense wealth, and that exact fact infuriated Brandon to no end. Your grandfather has millions of dollars just sitting dead in a bank account, while we are forced to rent a pathetic apartment, Brandon had once venomously whispered to Sarah during a Thanksgiving dinner, completely oblivious to the fact that I was standing right behind them. The old man is in his late 80s. If we don't act fast, all that money is going to get swallowed up by some useless charities. Pure, unfiltered greed had completely blinded them. They genuinely believed that my father's hard-earned wealth was their inherent, unquestionable right, and the sheer fact that he was still alive and perfectly capable of managing his own finances was viewed as an unacceptable obstacle to their lavish future. Attorney Patricia Anderson's office was located on the 14th floor of a towering glass building, a space chronically cluttered with towering stacks of legal files and documents. Patricia was a formidable woman in her early 60s, possessing eyes as sharp as a scalpel and an absolutely uncompromising, ruthless demeanor. When we pushed the heavy oak doors open and walked in, she didn't look the least bit surprised to see us. "William, Richard," Patricia gave a curt nod, gesturing for us to sit down. "The situation is far, far worse than any of us could have anticipated." My father sat up perfectly straight, clasping his hands tightly together. "They called 3 different banking institutions this morning to officially report me dead." Patricia didn't even flinch. She tapped her manicured fingernail lightly against the thick file folder. "Last Friday, Sarah officially filed a petition with the probate court requesting emergency, total conservatorship over you, William." I felt like I had stopped breathing. Emergency conservatorship? Exactly. Patricia opened the folder, pointing to the cold, harsh legal text. "According to these documents, Sarah is formally declaring that William is suffering from severe, advanced dementia, that he has completely lost all capacity for self-care, and that he frequently engages in erratic behavior that presents a clear and present danger to himself. She also completely fabricated a claim, stating that you, Richard, are actively exploiting his mental confusion to steal his assets. That is absolutely ridiculous." I slammed my hand down on the desk. "My father is perfectly lucid. He drives his own car, he calculates his own complex taxes. He manages absolutely everything by himself." "The court doesn't know that," Patricia replied coldly. And Sarah prepared for this meticulously. Both of them swore under penalty of perjury that they personally witnessed William wandering aimlessly on the street in a state of sheer panic, completely unable to remember his own name. My father narrowed his eyes. "I have never heard those 2 names in my entire life. Because they don't actually exist." Patricia pulled out another sheet of paper. "I had my private investigators looking into this first thing this morning. As for Michael Torres, they stole a photo from the LinkedIn profile of a real estate broker who lives all the way down in Florida. She hired fake witnesses." My stomach violently twisted itself into knots. A sudden overwhelming wave of nausea hit me. My daughter wasn't just greedy. She was actively committing serious felony crimes, doing so systematically and with a terrifying level of sophistication. "The emergency hearing is scheduled to take place tomorrow at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon," Patricia announced, her voice hardening. "If we do not show up and present irrefutable evidence to counter these claims, the judge will temporarily grant her full conservatorship." The exact second Sarah has that piece of paper in her hand, she can legally take over every single bank account, liquidate the real estate properties, and forcibly lock William away in a closed psychiatric facility. My father remained dead silent for a long time. The ticking of the wall clock echoed loudly, striking a harsh rhythm against the heavy, tense silence of the office. Then he looked up, his eyes flashing with the dangerous, predatory glint of an old wolf that had just been backed into a corner. "Patricia," he said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of 1,000 tons. "It is time to open Pandora's box, show Richard exactly what they tried to do back in July and September." I looked back and forth between my father and the attorney in utter confusion. July and September? Didn't this entire nightmare just start this morning? Patricia let out a heavy sigh and flipped to a different section of the massive folder where several documents were flagged with bright red sticky notes. The darkest, most deeply buried truths about the daughter I had once loved were about to be exposed in the harsh light of day. The very first page bore a heading that made the blood in my veins freeze completely solid. Federal Bureau of Investigation Investigative Report. My eyes widened in sheer shock as I stared at the federal agency's logo, sitting prominently in the top left corner of the document. The FBI. Why on earth was the FBI involved in my family's private matters? My father looked at me, his eyes holding a profound, heavy sorrow, but also an absolute, unyielding determination. "This didn't just start this morning, Richard. July was their very first trial run." Patricia flipped a page. It was an initial petition for conservatorship filed back in July, with Sarah listed as the sole petitioner. The evaluation clearly stated that my father suffered from severe cognitive impairment, severe behavioral disorders, and urgently required a full-time, appointed guardian. How is this even possible? I gasped in horror. Dad never went to see any doctor named Morrison. "You are absolutely right, I didn't," my father replied calmly. In July, Sarah used the excuse of needing to update my health insurance records. I thought it was just standard administrative bureaucracy, but in reality, that guy is one of Brandon's shady buddies. "He is absolutely not a medical doctor," Patricia chimed in, her voice dripping with sheer disgust. "He holds a bogus online diploma mill doctorate in education, and he previously had his business license permanently revoked in Nevada for blatant fraud. He has since fled the state." I felt completely hollow inside. The daughter I had raised, my own flesh and blood, had orchestrated a fake medical appointment just to fraudulently obtain a mental incompetence certificate against her own grandfather. And that was merely the opening act. Patricia tapped her expensive pen against the desk. When their forged documents failed spectacularly in court, they quickly realized that as long as William was still breathing, they would never be able to legally seize control of his assets. So they pivoted to Plan B in September. Patricia pulled out yet another document. My heart painfully constricted as I immediately recognized it as an official certificate of death. It bore the signature of an attending physician. "Last month, I had a scheduled appointment for routine blood work at the hospital," my father explained. "Sarah graciously volunteered to drive me there. She told me she desperately wanted to make up for our previous misunderstandings. But what she actually did was bribe a registered nurse named Jennifer Mason." Patricia pointed to a printed transcript of an audio recording included in the file. "William always carries a digital voice recorder disguised as a pen in his shirt pocket. He managed to perfectly record the illicit negotiation between Sarah and that nurse." I quickly skimmed the dialogue printed on the paper. "Sarah, when my grandfather passes away, I need the paperwork to be processed incredibly fast before the other leeches in the family jump in to interfere. Can you guarantee that? You file the paperwork immediately, and the money is yours." "That nurse didn't even bother to wait for me to actually die," my father said coldly. "The very next day, she officially filed the death certificate into the county system, blatantly forging the signature of an attending physician who was currently on vacation in Mexico. That exact same morning, the banks received the very first wave of death notifications, exactly like they did today. And what did we do about it?" I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "We called the police immediately," Patricia answered. "Jennifer Mason was arrested before noon that exact same day. When she named Sarah as her co-conspirator, the FBI officially requested William's full cooperation." My jaw dropped, my father, an 86-year-old man, acting as live bait for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. For the past 3 weeks, the FBI has been meticulously tracking every single phone call, email, and financial transaction made by both Sarah and Brandon, my father stated. They needed absolutely irrefutable evidence of a coordinated federal conspiracy to commit wire fraud. And this morning, when Brandon called 3 separate banks using his own personal email account to falsely report my death, while Sarah simultaneously left a highly threatening, incriminating voicemail on your phone, they effectively tied their own nooses around their necks. I dropped my head onto the table, a toxic mixture of deep humiliation, profound disappointment, and agonizing pain churned violently in my stomach. Every single cherished memory of the little girl with braided pigtails running through the sprinkler in our backyard shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. But why are they so incredibly desperate? I mumbled, unable to comprehend the sheer scale of their depravity. The ranch up in Evergreen is worth $2 million. But that's surely not enough to risk committing multiple federal felonies over, is it? Patricia and my father exchanged a long, incredibly serious look. That is because, my father said slowly, enunciating every word, they are not targeting the Evergreen Ranch. Richard, that property is just a stepping stone. What they truly want is vastly, exponentially larger than that. My father paused for a heartbeat, his eyes darkening. And Sarah somehow found out about it. That is the ultimate prize they are trying to steal. $14 million. That staggering amount of money was more than enough to turn greedy, entitled opportunists into bloodthirsty, ruthless monsters. If the emergency conservatorship petition gets approved tomorrow, Patricia analyzed the situation clinically. Sarah will gain the absolute legal authority to sell this entire building. She will undoubtedly liquidate it at a fire sale, price far below market value, just to get her hands on the immediate cash, immediately wire those funds into hidden offshore accounts, and vanish without a trace before anyone can even react. $14 million is more than enough for her and Brandon to live like royalty for the rest of their lives in a country with no extradition treaty. This was far beyond typical, everyday greed. This was a highly sophisticated, meticulously planned asset liquidation scheme, orchestrated by sociopaths devoid of any human empathy. They had planned to completely abandon me, leaving me as a penniless old man, while they stole absolutely everything and fled the country. Suddenly, the phone sitting on Patricia's desk vibrated violently. An email flagged with a bright red urgent priority icon popped up on her computer monitor. She quickly scanned the contents, and her usually stoic, unshakable face suddenly grew incredibly tense. "What is it?" my father demanded, his hand gripping the head of his walking cane tightly. Patricia turned the laptop screen around for us to see. I hired a highly specialized private investigation firm to aggressively monitor the dark web and track any suspicious digital footprint connected to Brandon's accounts. It was sent to a known associate named Marcus Webb. I squinted to read the glowing text displayed on the screen. Need alternative solution. Target is 86 years old, fully mobile and independent. Full payment upon verified completion. I didn't understand the jargon. What on earth is a comprehensive service package? Patricia slowly took off her glasses, looking directly into my eyes, her voice carrying a bone-chilling frost. In the criminal underworld, a comprehensive service package means a targeted assassination and complete disposal of the body, so it can never, ever be found. Brandon is absolutely desperate. He is actively hiring a hitman to execute your father. A terrifying, suffocating silence instantly crashed down on the room. It felt as if all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of the air. My own flesh and blood daughter and her husband were hiring an assassin to murder my father? We have to call the police right this exact second. I roared, shooting up from my chair. We have to alert the FBI. There isn't enough concrete evidence, Richard, Patricia stated coldly. It's an encrypted message using criminal slang, and there has been no verified financial transaction yet. He will simply find another, far more insidious way. Then what the hell are we supposed to do? Just sit here like sitting ducks and wait for them to send an assassin to execute him? I yelled angrily, both of my hands shaking uncontrollably. My father stood up. He stood perfectly straight. Even at 86 years old, he radiated an absolute, unshakable, terrifying authority. The authority of a man who had built a massive empire with his own two bare hands. "We are going to leave the city," my father declared, his voice deep, gravelly, and thick with absolute resolve. "We are going back home to the ranch in Evergreen right now." "Up into the mountains?" I asked, completely shocked. "That is a completely isolated area. If they send someone up there, we won't have anyone to help us." "That is exactly why I am choosing Evergreen." My father's eyes were as sharp as razor blades. "Here in Denver, we are sitting targets. If they want to play a deadly game of cat and mouse, I will personally show them who the true master of that mountain really is." Patricia nodded in agreement. "I will personally contact Sheriff Bradford over in Jefferson County. You two need to stay safe tonight." I looked at my father, the old man that Sarah had just cursed to die over the phone. The old man whose basic human rights she was desperately trying to strip away, was now preparing to step onto a literal battlefield to fiercely protect everything that belonged to him, and to protect me. We walked out of the attorney's office and took the elevator down to the underground parking garage. Everything had fundamentally changed. The horrific betrayal had brutally murdered any lingering love I had left, replacing it with only one single burning desire: absolute, merciless retribution. The real war was going to take place tonight. As our SUV merged onto the highway, leaving the bustling center of Denver behind and heading straight up toward the high mountains of Evergreen, dark, swirling storm clouds began to aggressively gather, completely blotting out the sun. A massive storm was rapidly approaching, a storm of pure, unadulterated karma. Before we eventually crossed paths with Marcus Webb and made our strategic retreat up to Evergreen, there was an agonizing, suffocating period of waiting inside Patricia's office. While she was frantically busy preparing the complex legal documents for the court hearing the next day, I sat rigidly on the black leather sofa, staring blankly out the large window at the distant Denver skyline. My mind was furiously spinning, desperately trying to piece together the fragmented memories of Sarah. How did things ever go this far? Or was it because I had willfully turned a blind eye to the glaring warning signs that had been present for so long? I vividly recalled a mild afternoon in May, just a few short months after Margaret passed away. That was the very first time I noticed something was terribly wrong. I was cleaning and organizing the master bedroom that day. I decided it was time to safely store Margaret's red velvet jewelry box inside the heavy steel safe. That box contained absolutely priceless family heirlooms. A stunning pearl necklace I had gifted her for our 10th wedding anniversary, and a solid gold bracelet that had been passed down directly from Margaret's grandmother. But when I opened the box, it was completely empty. My heart felt like it was being physically crushed. I frantically tore the entire room apart, pulling out every single drawer, flipping over every layer of bedding. I immediately called Sarah, who was living in a rented apartment just a few blocks away at the time. "Sarah, have you seen your mother's pearl necklace and gold bracelet anywhere?" I asked, my voice laced with sheer panic. "I can't find them in her jewelry box." The line went dead silent for a heartbeat. It was a very brief silence, but it was more than enough to make my stomach drop. Then her voice returned, incredibly smooth and shockingly natural. "Oh, Dad, I completely forgot to tell you. When I was helping you clean the room the other day, I noticed the clasp on the jewelry box was loose, so I took those pieces to the jeweler to get them professionally polished and repaired. I was planning on bringing them back to you this weekend." I immediately breathed a massive sigh of relief. "Thank you so much, Sarah. Next time you do something like that, please just let me know beforehand." But that weekend came and went, and she didn't bring them back. The following week passed as well. I wandered in simply to browse for vintage pocket watches, a small hobby of mine, and right there, sitting blatantly under the harsh fluorescent lights of the clearance display case, was my wife's pearl necklace. Right next to the solid gold bracelet, the pawn shop owner explicitly confirmed that a young woman named Sarah Stone had brought them in to pawn exactly 3 months prior. Since she had completely defaulted on the loan, the items had been legally seized and put up for public sale. That very evening, I summoned Sarah to the house. I violently slammed the pawn shop redemption receipt down onto the table. For the very first time in my entire life, I unleashed my absolute fury upon my daughter. "Why the hell would you do this?" I roared at her, Those were your mother's most sacred heirlooms. Are you so incredibly desperate for cash that you have to resort to stealing from the dead?" And how did Sarah react? She didn't argue back. She cried uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face, her entire body shaking violently. "Dad, I am so sorry. Hit me, scream at me, do whatever you want," she wailed. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I am a terrible, worthless daughter." She sobbed, she begged, she literally slapped her own face in a dramatic display of remorse. And I, a grieving father who had just tragically lost his beloved wife, drowning in unbearable loneliness and despair, simply could not bear the agonizing sight of my own daughter suffering. I even handed her an additional $5,000 to pay off the loan sharks, utterly convinced that a father's unconditional love and forgiveness would finally force her to wake up and change her ways. But I was horribly, tragically wrong. My forgiveness didn't inspire an ounce of genuine remorse in her. I had unknowingly handed her a golden pass, the absolute right to brutally hurt me without ever facing a single consequence. And ever since the necklace incident, Sarah's greed relentlessly expanded. She began actively controlling my life in the most insidious, manipulative ways imaginable. She would frequently call me at the most ungodly hours to cry about her financial struggles. "Dad, Brandon's car broke down completely, and we literally don't have a dime to fix it. Please help us, otherwise he's going to lose his job." Then, it escalated to covering their basic living expenses. "Dad, our homeowner's insurance just skyrocketed. You're living all alone anyway. It's such a waste to just let your pension sit there." Every single time I hesitated or tried to set a boundary, she immediately weaponized Margaret's tragic death. "Mom always wanted us to be happy. If Mom knew you were abandoning me like this, she would be absolutely heartbroken." That psychological manipulation was a daily occurrence, like relentless drops of water slowly eroding a solid rock. I actually started to feel intensely guilty if I didn't hand them cash. I drastically cut back on my own personal expenses, stopped buying new books, stopped going on weekend fishing trips with my friends, all just to funnel every spare penny into helping her and her parasitic husband. But apparently, even that was never enough. They eventually set their sights on the truly massive assets. I vividly remembered a highly disturbing conversation during Thanksgiving dinner last year. Sarah had consumed several glasses of wine, her cheeks flushed red. She looked around my spacious, empty house and let out a long, heavy sigh. "Dad, this house is just way too big for one person. The maintenance costs, the massive utility bills, the property taxes. Wouldn't that be absolutely perfect?" I flatly refused. "This house is filled with countless cherished memories of your mother. I am going to die in this house. I am not going anywhere." The sweet smile on Sarah's face instantly froze solid. She slammed her wine glass down onto the table so violently that red wine splashed across the white tablecloth. The look in her eyes at that exact moment was chillingly cold and utterly ruthless. A look I never, ever imagined could appear on the face of my own child. "You just stubbornly cling to the past," she hissed viciously. "Grandpa is exactly the same way. This family is incredibly selfish." That was the exact moment I realized they didn't just want my spare change anymore. They wanted the entire empire. They wanted my father and me to completely disappear, or at the very least, be rendered completely incapacitated, so they could legally and justifiably seize control of absolutely everything. The sound of the office door swinging open violently snapped me out of my dark thoughts. Patricia walked back in, holding a fresh stack of freshly printed documents in her hands. "I just received extremely disturbing new information from a highly placed contact at the courthouse," Patricia announced, her face grim. "Sarah recently utilized a hidden offshore shell company account to prepay the entire legal retainer for this conservatorship case. And those funds were wired directly from an untraceable account in the Cayman Islands." My father raised an eyebrow. "The Caymans? Brandon is actively laundering money from his pathetic online scams to fund this full-scale attack against us." "Exactly." Patricia nodded firmly. "And what's infinitely worse is that they have already pre-arranged a curated list of predatory real estate brokers who specialize in acquiring distressed assets and foreclosures. If the judge signs that emergency conservatorship order tomorrow, they will immediately liquidate the $14 million building on 17th Street within exactly 72 hours, selling it for less than half its actual value, simply to get their hands on untraceable liquid cash. It was a terrifyingly flawless, blood-curdling plan. They weren't just purely evil. They were highly organized and incredibly sophisticated. Right at that exact moment, my cell phone vibrated with a sharp, dry beep. "This is Marcus Webb. We need to talk immediately. Bring William." The sudden text message from the private investigator was like a lit match thrown directly into a massive powder keg, waiting to explode. Brandon had explicitly raised the bounty from $10,000 to $20,000 in cash just to pinpoint our exact current location. And when Webb went radio silent, Brandon instantly escalated to actively seeking out the comprehensive service package. He had fully crossed the line from civil fraud into the darkest, most dangerous realm of violent criminal felonies. Looked over at my father, at 86 years old, he didn't display even a microscopic trace of fear. He was a solid block of granite, forged and hardened by time and countless storms. "We are going to go meet this investigator," my father declared, leaning heavily on his cane as he stood up. "And then we are heading straight up to Evergreen. It is time for the rats to finally face the trap." And just like that, the tense journey from the attorney's office to the dark, echoing parking garage began, leading us straight into a long, terrifying night at the Evergreen Fortress, the exact place where the final masks would be violently ripped off, and the sacred bond of family blood would officially be proven to be the absolute cheapest commodity on earth. As our SUV slowly pulled into the dimly lit parking structure of the building, my phone vibrated again with another sharp beep. An SMS message from an unknown number, "Bring William." Marcus Webb, that was the exact name explicitly mentioned in Brandon's encrypted dark web message attempting to hire a hitman. I read the chilling message aloud to my father and Patricia. Patricia immediately and fiercely objected. "I am calling the police right now." "No." My father placed a firm, reassuring hand on Patricia's shoulder, his eyes unyielding. "If this man genuinely wanted to kill us, he would never have sent a text message, arranging a meeting in a highly public parking garage, loaded with security cameras. We have to meet him so we can find out exactly what Sarah and Brandon are planning to do next." 30 agonizing minutes later, we stood in the shadowy northwest corner of the third floor. The flickering fluorescent lights cast long, bizarre, and terrifying shadows across the concrete. Marcus Webb was leaning casually against a thick concrete pillar. He looked to be in his early 50s, wearing a worn black leather jacket, his hair cut in a tight military style. He slowly raised both of his hands into the air to clearly demonstrate he was completely unarmed. "Mr. Stone," Webb spoke, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "I accepted the contract." He pulled out his cell phone, unlocked the screen, and held it out for us to see. "But early this morning, he suddenly jacked the price up to $10,000 just to instantly verify your exact current location. When I deliberately ignored him, he immediately reached out to someone else." Webb swiped the screen to reveal a different screenshot. It was the exact same encrypted message regarding the comprehensive service package that Patricia had just shown us. "I am a military veteran," Webb stated flatly, shoving the phone back into his pocket. "I work as a private investigator to pay my bills, but I have strict, uncrossable boundaries. You need to disappear immediately." "Thank you for the warning, Marcus." My father nodded, his voice terrifyingly calm. "But I am not in the habit of running away from pathetic thieves trying to steal what belongs to me." Webb narrowed his eyes at my father, seemingly registering the unbreakable, hardened resolve of this 86-year-old man. He casually tossed me a cheap burner phone. "Best of luck to you." With those final words, he turned on his heel and disappeared silently into the shadows. The Evergreen Ranch was heavily secluded, nestled deep within a dense forest of ancient pine trees, located over an hour's drive from Denver. It was 40 sprawling acres of privately owned woodland, completely fortified by thick barbed wire fencing and massive, heavy iron gates. When we finally arrived, Sheriff Tom Bradford was already waiting for us, right at the main entrance. He waved a friendly greeting to my father, his smile warm but his eyes highly alert and cautious. "William, Patricia called me and filled me in," Tom said, walking over to our vehicle. "I have already positioned a heavily armed deputy in an unmarked cruiser at the bend half a mile down the road, and another cruiser will be running continuous, rolling patrols around the entire perimeter all night long. Any unidentified vehicle that enters a 2-mile radius of this property will be immediately intercepted and thoroughly searched. Thank you so much, Tom. My father firmly shook his old friend's hand. You have always been the one man I know I can implicitly trust. Are you absolutely sure you don't want me to post a couple of deputies directly inside the house to guard you? Tom asked, genuine concern etching his features. That won't be necessary, my father replied smoothly. I want them to arrogantly believe they have finally cornered a helpless, defenseless old man. Let them walk blindly straight into the trap. We walked inside. The massive sprawling log cabin was steeped in classic rustic elegance, filled with countless warm memories of my mother. My father bypassed the living room and walked straight to a discreet built-in cabinet, punched a long code into a hidden keypad, and opened the door to a highly sophisticated security control room. 16 high-definition camera feeds instantly flickered onto the monitors, providing absolute, total surveillance of the entire perimeter surrounding the house. He pulled a thick, heavy file folder out of a massive steel safe. These are the absolute original copies of every single property deed, the will, and the complete structure of the family trust. This ranch and the $14 million building downtown. My father looked at me, his eyes overflowing with a profound, agonizing sorrow. It is finally time to show you my real will, Richard. He opened to the very first page. I read the sharply typed legal text. I, William Charles Stone, being of completely sound mind and acting of my own free will, hereby bequeath my entire estate, including all real property, liquid assets and investment trusts, entirely to my sole surviving son, Richard Michael Stone. As for my granddaughter, Sarah Elizabeth Stone, I hereby bequeath to her exactly $1. $1. I officially sign this will on the 8th of October, my father said quietly. The exact same day she took me to that fake medical appointment and snuck into the room with that fraudulent lawyer to trick me into signing a power of attorney. Sarah has never loved us. She only loves our money. I was completely speechless. Only a profound, suffocating bitterness welled up inside me. This grueling legal and psychological warfare had completely eroded every last ounce of faith I had in my own flesh and blood. The afternoon slowly faded into evening. The biting mountain chill began to seep through the window panes. We sat in the heavy darkness, silently waiting. The silence was stretched as tight as a piano wire. I double-checked the digital voice recorder in my pocket. My father brewed a fresh pot of tea. The sharp clink of the teacup against the porcelain saucer echoed loudly. And then, at exactly 11:23 p.m., the perimeter alarm system at the main gate emitted a soft, sharp beep. My father immediately glanced at the infrared camera monitors. A massive black SUV, its headlights completely turned off, was slowly and stealthily creeping up the gravel driveway leading toward the house. Time crawled by in a slow, agonizingly haunting manner. As the deep night descended upon the evergreen forest, the temperature plummeted, bringing with it a thick, soupy fog that completely blanketed the large glass windows of the living room. We had purposefully disabled the automated central heating system, opting instead to use a small, crackling wood fireplace in the corner of the room to avoid drawing any unnecessary attention from the outside. The thick darkness enveloped the vast space, punctuated only by the flickering, dancing orange light of the burning logs. My father sat hunched in a dark brown leather armchair, his eyes closed as if he were deep in meditation. The digital voice recorder sat prominently on the glass coffee table right in front of him, right next to a heavy revolver he had pulled from the safe. It was fully loaded, but the safety catch was still firmly engaged. He had absolutely no intention of using it to take a life, but in a life-or-death situation, an 86-year-old man had to know exactly how to defend himself against hired thugs. "Are you scared, Dad?" I whispered softly, terrified that a loud noise would somehow shatter the tense, vigilant silence. My father slowly opened his eyes. The dancing firelight cast harsh shadows across the deep wrinkles on his weathered face, highlighting his hardened, stoic expression. "Fear is a completely natural human reflex, Richard," he replied calmly, taking a sip of his lukewarm tea. "But right now I don't feel fear. I feel profound sadness, a deep, bottomless sorrow that absolutely no amount of wealth on this earth could ever possibly fill." He shifted his gaze up to the empty space on the wall above the fireplace, where a large, beautiful portrait of Margaret used to hang. You know, when Sarah was a little girl, she absolutely loved sitting up on my shoulders whenever we took walks through this forest. My father reminisced, his voice suddenly growing warm and deeply nostalgic. She used to point at the towering pine trees and excitedly tell me that one day she wanted to build a massive treehouse so she could see the entire world. I built her a beautiful treehouse with my own 2 hands right out back on the hill. I distinctly remembered that old treehouse. It had slowly rotted away over the years, decaying just like the soul of the innocent child who used to play in it. Back then, I honestly thought I would do absolutely anything to protect her smile, he continued, letting out a long, heavy sigh. But I tragically failed to realize that overprotection can sometimes act as a slow poison, entirely stripping a child of their independence and basic human empathy. We completely failed to teach her how to appreciate the things she had. And the second the universe stopped revolving around her, the second she had to face actual financial hardship caused directly by her, and Brandon's recklessly extravagant lifestyle, she mutated into a ravenous monster, perfectly willing to cannibalize her own family. My father's words pierced my mind like sharp needles. I carried a massive share of the blame in this tragedy. I had been far too consumed with my demanding job as a teacher, constantly grinding to provide for my family materially, while severely neglecting the crucial task of molding my daughter's character. When Margaret passed away, I foolishly used money as a pathetic substitute for comfort, enabling and indulging Sarah's increasingly unreasonable parasitic demands. "We cannot turn back the hands of time, Dad," I said, my eyes burning with unshed tears. "But tonight we have to put a permanent end to this." "You are absolutely right," my father nodded, his eyes instantly hardening back into a cold, ruthless glare. "Every single mistake demands a heavy price. He doesn't just want our money, he wants our lives. If we do not ruthlessly extinguish this fire tonight, it will eventually consume both you and Daniel." The mere mention of Daniel made my heart ache violently. My son was currently living in Seattle, bravely battling early-onset Parkinson's disease at the young age of 38, struggling to raise 2 small children. He was completely oblivious to the vicious, blood-soaked war currently raging here in Denver. If something fatal were to happen to my father and me, Sarah would seize absolute control of the entire estate, and I was 1000% certain. She would ruthlessly kick Daniel out onto the street, refusing to give him and my grandchildren a single penny for his critical medical treatments. "I will never let them touch a single hair on Daniel's head," I hissed, my hands balling into tight fists. "That is exactly why we must secure an absolute victory in court tomorrow," my father stated firmly. "I have already instructed Patricia to establish a highly specialized, irrevocable medical trust. Regardless of the outcome of this massive fraud case, the funds required for Daniel's lifetime medical care and the college tuition for those 2 kids have been permanently secured. This trust is locked down tight. Even if you and I are gone, Sarah will never, ever be able to lay a single finger on it." I stared in awe at the 86-year-old patriarch sitting before me. Even while actively facing the terrifying prospect of a targeted assassination, his razor-sharp mind was still meticulously calculating and securing the future of the people he loved. That was the true profound meaning of being a father, the true head of a family. It wasn't about leaving behind a massive pile of cash for greedy heirs to fight over. It was about constructing an impenetrable fortress to fiercely protect the innocent and simultaneously digging a lethal pitfall to bury the treacherous. The howling wind outside the window grew increasingly violent, serving as a dark, haunting soundtrack to the thickening night. Time crept by at an agonizing pace, 10:30, 11 o'clock, 11:15. Suddenly, the security monitor mounted on the wall flashed brilliantly. The infrared motion detection system had been tripped. A ghostly, glowing heat signature materialized near the eastern side entrance of the sprawling property. "It begins," my father said, gripping his heavy wooden cane and slowly standing up. The final battle had officially arrived at our doorstep. "They are here," my father announced, his voice carrying the chilling frost of a winter storm. He stood up completely straight, gripping his cane tightly. On the glowing monitor, the massive SUV rolled to a stop approximately 30 yards from the front porch. 2 figures quickly stepped out of the vehicle, Perhaps they didn't have enough liquid cash to pay the upfront fee for the comprehensive service package. Or perhaps they were simply too terrified of getting caught by the cartel. Whatever the reason, they had apparently decided to do the dirty work themselves. Brandon marched to the back of the SUV and aggressively yanked out a long, heavy steel crowbar. Sarah followed closely behind him, bundled in a dark coat, gripping a small tactical flashlight. They didn't head toward the front door. Instead, they marched with grim determination straight toward the reinforced storage shed located in the back garden, the exact place where my father historically kept all his crucial original documents. They are specifically targeting the paperwork, my father whispered astutely. They want to physically destroy the original will and the property deeds before the emergency hearing tomorrow. I am going out there, I declared firmly, my hand gripping the cold doorknob. The recorder is on. I've got your back. My father nodded, grabbing his smartphone, the video camera already actively recording. I quietly pushed the side door open, slipping out into the freezing, biting night air. I crept silently around the side of the massive log cabin, the sound of my footsteps completely masked by the howling mountain wind tearing through the pine trees. As I closed in on the storage shed, Brandon was raising the heavy steel crowbar high above his head, preparing to violently smash it down onto the heavy padlock of the reinforced steel door. "Stop right there!" I roared, snapping my bright flashlight on and shining the blinding beam directly into their faces. The sudden, piercing light startled them badly, causing them to stumble backward, throwing their hands up to shield their eyes. "Sarah," I called out my daughter's name. My voice was trembling, not from fear but from a profound, overwhelming disgust. Sneaking onto someone else's property in the dead of night armed with a crowbar. Is this really how you two operate now? Sarah slowly lowered her arm, squinting fiercely into the blinding beam of the flashlight. There wasn't a single shred of remorse. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury and venom. She looked haggard, her eyes bloodshot and manic, resembling a rabid animal that had finally been cornered. "Get out of my way, Dad." Sarah ground her teeth, taking a menacing step forward. "Every single asset on this property should rightfully belong to me. The $14 million building in downtown Denver. Why the hell did you and him hide that from me?" She had finally said it out loud. $14 million. You have absolutely no right to any of it. I growled, my voice thick with contempt. You actively conspired to lock your own grandfather in a psychiatric ward. You hired people to forge a fake death certificate so you could steal his estate while his heart was still beating. And you have the sheer audacity to stand here and talk about your rights? I earned every single penny of it. She screamed, her voice completely unhinged. I suffered. I obediently played the role of the perfect, dutiful granddaughter for years. Mom cowardly ran away and died, and now he is planning to steal everything that belongs to me just to hand it over to you? Never. The vicious, sickening insult hurled at Margaret, the mother who had endured excruciating pain to bring her into this world, struck my heart like a physical dagger. The very last, lingering thread of my paternal love violently snapped and died. You do not have the right to even speak your mother's name, I hissed, my voice deadly quiet. Brandon, the worthless, parasitic son-in-law, suddenly surged forward. He raised the heavy steel crowbar threateningly, his eyes wide and burning with genuine, murderous intent. We are not leaving here empty-handed, old man, Brandon snarled viciously. You get out of our way right now, or I swear to God I will smash your skull wide open, and then I'll take care of the other old bastard. The exact second the violent threat left his lips, a powerful, commanding voice boomed from the shadows of the front porch, resonating with such absolute, terrifying authority that it froze Brandon dead in his tracks. You just explicitly threatened to commit premeditated murder, Brandon. My father slowly stepped out from the darkness, his smartphone held high, the camera recording light glowing, bright red, pointed directly at them. Every single word is on tape, my father announced, his voice as steady and cold as a judge delivering a death sentence. Aggravated trespassing, attempted destruction of property, and felony terroristic threats with a deadly weapon. Every single threat, every single action you two just took, I have recorded it all flawlessly. And the Federal Bureau of Investigation is going to absolutely love this footage, Sarah's jaw dropped. The terrifying acronym FBI struck her ears like a physical thunderbolt. "Woo, what did you just say?" Sarah stammered, stumbling backward, her arrogant, entitled facade instantly and completely shattering into dust. "Did you honestly think your pathetic little game of playing fake doctor, bribing a nurse to forge a death certificate, and drafting that garbage fraudulent power of attorney would actually fool me?" My father let out a harsh, contemptuous laugh. "Did you really think those 3 frantic calls you made to the banks this morning weren't immediately flagged and traced? The FBI has had you in their crosshairs for 3 full weeks. You could have safely walked away if you had just known when to quit, but your bottomless greed has successfully marched you straight into a federal prison cell." Clang! The heavy steel crowbar slipped from Brandon's sweaty grip, crashing down onto the gravel driveway with a sharp, deafening ring. His entire body was shaking uncontrollably, his hands flying up to clutch his head. He knew the game was completely over. He had lost absolutely everything. Sarah burst into tears. The familiar, highly practiced, manipulative fake tears began to flow freely once again. She collapsed onto the freezing, sharp gravel, crawling on her knees desperately toward me. Daddy, please!" she wailed hysterically, grabbing desperately at the fabric of my pants. "You can't send your own flesh and blood to prison. Brandon manipulated me into doing this. I swear I never wanted to hurt you." Without a second's hesitation, she viciously threw her own husband under the bus in a pathetic, desperate attempt to save her own skin. But before I even had the chance to respond, a blindingly bright spotlight swept across the dark garden. The deafening, piercing wail of police sirens violently shattered the quiet, peaceful silence of the mountain night. 3 marked Jefferson County Sheriff's patrol cruisers, led by Sheriff Tom Bradford's vehicle, tore up the steep gravel driveway and slammed on their brakes, effectively boxing in Sarah's SUV. Heavily armed deputies swarmed out of their vehicles, weapons drawn and leveled, multiple high-powered flashlights, illuminating Sarah and Brandon in a blinding crossfire. "Drop your weapons. Put your hands on top of your head right now," a deputy roared with absolute authority. Sheriff Tom Bradford strode forward, his sharp eyes briefly scanning the discarded crowbar on the ground, before turning to my father. "William, is everyone all right?" "We are perfectly fine, Tom," my father said, calmly lowering his phone. "I have highly incriminating video evidence of armed terroristic threats, conspiracy to commit grand larceny, and attempted destruction of property. Here is the footage." Brandon meekly raised his hands, completely surrendering as 2 large deputies forcefully shoved him against the hood of the cruiser and slapped the heavy steel handcuffs on his wrists. Sarah remained kneeling on the gravel, wailing like an absolute lunatic, relentlessly and pathetically begging me for mercy. "Daddy, please save me, Daddy." I looked down at her. There was absolutely no pity left in my eyes. "You are exactly right, Sarah," I replied, my voice as freezing cold as the snow on the mountain peaks. "You are my daughter, and that is undeniably the greatest tragedy of my entire life. Enjoy your new life in federal prison." I turned my back and walked into the house with my father, leaving behind the desperate, hysterical wails of the fraudsters as the deputies handcuffed them and shoved them into the back of the patrol cruisers. The physical battle was over for tonight, but the final, devastating unmasking would take place tomorrow at the courthouse, right in front of the judge, to completely obliterate their sickening conspiracy. At 2 o'clock in the morning, long after the police cruisers had departed and returned absolute peace to the forest, my father and I walked back into the living room. My father, exhausted, dropped heavily into his armchair and closed his eyes. The events of the night had severely drained the life force of the old man. I brewed him a fresh cup of hot tea and sat down in the chair opposite him. "Dad," I spoke up, breaking the heavy silence, "how did Mom know? How could she possibly foresee Sarah's profound evil while I remained completely, blindly oblivious to it?" My father slowly opened his eyes. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small, worn brown leather-bound notebook. The initials Emma's Margaret Stoneware, elegantly embossed on the cover. "This is exactly how." My father placed the notebook on the table and gently pushed it toward me. "Your mother's private diary." She started recognizing Sarah's true, insidious nature through a series of seemingly small incidents. stealing her cousin's allowance money when she was 12, forging parental signatures in high school, and blatantly lying about her college tuition fees just to get extra spending money. Margaret always covered up for her, right up until she tragically realized that her constant protection was actively creating a monster. With trembling hands, I carefully opened the diary. My beloved wife's familiar, slanted handwriting instantly filled my vision. March 15, 2020. Sarah came to visit today. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She specifically asked exactly how much my life insurance payout would be. Richard is far too gentle and kind to recognize the sheer ravenous greed in her eyes. July 22, 2020. I checked the browsing history on the shared family tablet. Sarah had been actively searching how to forge a power of attorney and guardianship laws for incapacitated seniors. She is meticulously planning something terrible. May 18, 2021, final entry. I am not afraid of dying. I am absolutely terrified of what Sarah will do after I am gone. You must wait for the golden moment, the exact moment when the veil of denial in Richard's mind is violently burned to ash by Sarah's own hands. Only then show my son this book. I gently closed the diary, hot tears streaming uncontrollably down my cheeks. My brilliant wife, and that golden moment was exactly tonight, when Sarah showed up wielding a heavy steel crowbar to violently smash her way into stealing our assets. It was an agonizing, heartbreaking truth, but an absolutely necessary one. 1:47 p. The following afternoon, Wednesday, Denver Probate Court. My father and I, flanked by our attorney Patricia Anderson, strode confidently through the heavy double doors of courtroom number 3. Sarah was already seated at the petitioner's table. She had been granted temporary bail early this morning, but she was securely fitted with a bulky GPS tracking ankle monitor due to the felony trespassing charges. She wore a conservative gray suit, desperately attempting to look presentable and professional, but the heavy dark circles under her eyes and her sickly pale complexion could not hide her sheer, unadulterated panic. At exactly 2 o'clock, Judge Linda Morrison banged her gavel to open the session. The emergency conservatorship hearing had officially commenced. Sarah's attorney, Marcus Hunt, confidently called his very first witness to the stand. It was Robert Caldwell, one of the 2 men who had formally signed the fraudulent sworn affidavits. Mr. Caldwell, Hunt began, asking highly leading questions. Have you personally witnessed Mr. William Stone in a state of severe paranoia, confusion, and complete inability to remember the names of his own family members? Yes, Your Honor, Caldwell lied smoothly, multiple times over the past 6 months. Patricia Anderson smiled a razor-thin, terrifying smile. She stood up, carrying a thick stack of documents. Good afternoon, Mr. Caldwell, Patricia stated, her voice echoing sharply. Could you please verbally confirm your current residential address for the court? 1247 Blake Street, Denver. Patricia calmly connected her tablet to the courtroom's large projector screen. The photograph of Caldwell from the affidavit popped up, large and crystal clear. Your Honor, Patricia addressed the judge directly. There is absolutely no one by the name of Robert Caldwell residing at 1247 Blake Street. Furthermore, the photograph attached to this man's sworn affidavit is actually a generic stock photo purchased directly from Shutterstock for exactly $5. This man's real legal name is Jake Renfro, and he is an unemployed local actor. A loud collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Caldwell's face drained of all color, heavy beads of sweat instantly forming on his forehead. And here, Patricia smoothly clicked to the very next slide. Is the official Venmo transaction record from Sarah Stone's bank account directly to Jake Renfro for the exact amount of $500, with the memo explicitly reading, acting gig payment. Judge Morrison scowled fiercely, slamming her gavel down hard. This witness's testimony is entirely stricken from the record, and he will be immediately detained for felony perjury. Does the petitioner have any other so-called evidence to present? Sarah swallowed hard, audibly gulping. Her attorney, Hunt, frantically shuffled through his disorganized papers, utterly bewildered, before slowly shaking his head. Patricia wasn't even close to being finished. Your Honor, the defense would like to call a highly specialized witness to the stand. Brandon Mitchell. The heavy side doors of the courtroom swung open. 2 heavily armed federal agents marched Brandon into the room. Early this morning, while facing the terrifying prospect of a mandatory life sentence in federal prison for wire fraud and conspiracy to commit murder for hire. Brandon had quickly taken a plea deal, agreeing to fully cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for a significantly reduced sentence. He had completely, utterly sold out his own wife. Sarah shot up from her chair, her eyes bulging out of her head as she glared at her husband. "Brandon, what the hell are you doing?" The judge violently banged her gavel. "The petitioner will sit down immediately." Brandon slowly shuffled up to the witness stand, deliberately avoiding any eye contact with Sarah. "Mr. Mitchell," Patricia began her surgical strike. "Did you personally call 3 separate banking institutions yesterday morning to falsely report the death of Mr. William Stone?" "Yes, I did," Brandon mumbled pathetically into the microphone. It was entirely Sarah's idea. She desperately wanted to seize total control of the assets. "She told me her grandfather was incredibly old and was going to die soon anyway, so we needed to strike first before he could finalize his will and leave all the money to some useless charities." "You are a liar," Sarah screamed like a deranged lunatic. "You were the one who hired that private investigator. You were the one who wanted to have him killed." Patricia raised her hand, instantly silencing the chaotic uproar. She hit play on an audio file loaded onto her phone. It was the crystal-clear recording of their vicious, screaming argument over the phone from yesterday morning. The exact recording my father had captured. Brandon's frantic, panicked voice echoed through the courtroom. "I am not saying a damn word. This was your brilliant idea. You were the one who wanted to." Sarah's shrill, venomous voice instantly shrieked back. "Don't you even try to pin this on me. If I go to prison, you are going down right alongside me." The sharp, ear-piercing audio of pure, unadulterated greed and vicious betrayal echoed off the high ceilings of the courtroom. Absolutely everything was fully exposed. A deeply sadistic, highly coordinated scheme to violently strip an old man of $14 million and a sprawling estate, completely sacrificing the sacred bond of family blood in the process. Judge Morrison slowly removed her reading glasses. Her eyes glared down at Sarah with absolute, freezing contempt. "I have heard more than enough," the judge declared firmly. "The petition for emergency conservatorship is denied with extreme prejudice. I am officially revoking her temporary bail immediately. Bailiffs, take her into custody and formally transfer all files to the federal criminal court for immediate prosecution." 2 heavy-set bailiffs quickly stepped forward, firmly grabbing Sarah by the arms. She thrashed wildly, screaming hysterically. There was no more entitled superiority. There was only absolute, bottomless despair she had completely lost. She had thrown away absolutely everything. Her husband, the massive inheritance, her freedom, and her entire family. A few months after that explosive court hearing, our lives slowly began to return to a peaceful, normal trajectory. Brandon, strictly due to his full cooperation with the FBI, received a relatively lenient sentence of 5 years probation, under extremely heavy supervision. Sarah, however, facing a massive mountain of federal charges ranging from felony wire fraud and aggravated identity theft to conspiracy to commit grand larceny, was ultimately sentenced to 7 hard years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. On a crisp, beautiful autumn weekend afternoon, my father and I sat on the wide porch of the Evergreen Ranch, leisurely sipping hot tea. The mountain air was incredibly cool and refreshing. We watched peacefully as golden leaves slowly drifted down onto the manicured lawn. A familiar car pulled up and parked in the driveway. Daniel, my youngest son, Sarah's younger brother, stepped out of the vehicle. Daniel was currently battling the early stages of Parkinson's disease, but his smile remained as gentle and pure as an angel's, exactly as Margaret had always described him. He hurried over and pulled both me and his grandfather into a massive, warm hug. "Dad," Daniel said hesitantly, after we had all sat down around the patio table. "I have something I need to confess to you. Back in July, Sarah actually called me." My father and I exchanged a quick glance. "What exactly did she say to you?" I asked. "She explicitly offered me $500,000 in cash." Daniel looked down at his hands. "In exchange, I had to testify in court and commit perjury, swearing that you were losing your mind and physically abusing Grandpa. She knew exactly how desperate I was for the money to pay for my medical treatments and to support my 2 kids." My heart skipped a beat, And how exactly did you answer her? I told her to go straight to hell. Daniel looked up, his clear eyes filled with unwavering, absolute resolve. And I explicitly warned her that if she ever called me with that garbage again, I would immediately report her to the police. The money is incredibly important, but I will never ever sell out my own family. I reached across the table and gripped my son's hand tightly. A single tear of profound happiness rolled down my cheek. I had tragically lost a treacherous, evil daughter, but I still had an absolutely wonderful son, a truly great father, and the beautiful, loving legacy of my late wife. You did the exact right thing, Daniel. My father smiled warmly, radiating pure pride. The bond of true family is undeniably the most sacred thing in this world, but unchecked greed possesses the terrifying power to mutate a human soul into a bloodthirsty demon. The greatest, most profound lesson I ever learned, a lesson written in blood, sweat, and agonizing pain, is that you must never, ever soften your heart in the face of pure evil, even if that evil wears the familiar face of your own flesh and blood. Showing mercy and tolerance to a greedy parasite is simply handing them the knife to bleed you dry. You must always be prepared, you must always remain vigilant, and you must know exactly how to deliver a devastating, fatal strike when the golden moment finally arrives. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. I truly hope that it serves as a loud, ringing alarm bell for anyone who might find themselves trapped in a similar nightmare. I will see you all again in the next story. And please, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel.